Welcome to a football show, Labor Day, Tuesday edition, but week number 1 in the NFL, and that is what matters. Brought to you by Sinkers Beverages. That is Paul Kuharsky, and I am Braden Gall. Paul, good to see you. Are you ready for actual football on a field with players?
I am. Countdown is exceptionally painful for me because a lot of people get enjoyment out of preseason football for some reason. They say football is back at the first weekend of preseason. Football is not back. Football is not back until Thursday night. Friday night, we'll see some. I know there were some reasonable college games, but also 63-0 football is not back, and we'll get some of those every weekend, which is the problem with college football. But that's a separate show. Yeah. So for us who follow the Titans, football's back at noon Central on Sunday in Chicago, and it's been a long wait. Ready to see what this team looks like.
And a completely new team it is. We've talked a lot about it all summer, about the new front office and the new structure and the new analytics and the new strength and conditioning and the new coach and the new this and the new that. I think in your piece, paulkuharsky.com, of course, is the website. I want to say 37 players is what you put in there that have changed since Ran Carthon took over. And in the offseason, more than half of the roster is different. So it's a very new era for Tennessee Titans football. We will give you our sort of AFC South and official AFC playoff predictions today a little bit later on the show. Harold Landry had some very interesting comments about sort of the end of the last era and the beginning of the new era, and just the general roster evolution. Like even since the last time you and I were on, they obviously made a bunch of cuts, but names that were fairly high profile in this organization for fans, the Caleb Farleys of the world, Elijah Molden, Rashad Weaver, all gone and have been traded. They went and got a middle linebacker to start in Ernest Jones, a very opportunistic move by Ran Carthon. So we're going to get to a lot of stuff today on the show. Real quickly,
it's actually 23 new players on this 53 as it stands right now, and 37 over the last 2 years. Last year it was 24 new players, but 11 of those guys are gone.
Well, I mean, again, 24 new and then 23 new. I know it's not 57 total because those count, but like that's just a lot of turnover, and it's what you expect.
Shit ton of players.
Right. And frankly, they didn't have dudes last year. That was part of the problem. It wasn't all coaching.
More dudes this year.
They need dudes, and they've got some more. That's certainly the case as they went and spent a boatload of cash in the offseason to acquire those dudes. And then the draft picks seem to be in line to play major roles this season as well. So lots of stuff to get to today. If you want to get into the comments section, please do so. You can hit a thumbs up there. You can ask questions. You can get involved that way. Write a review. Of course, make sure you do that on both the podcast app. You can also share on Twitter and Facebook as well. Lots of stuff to do. paulkuharsky.com. You'll have a recap after the Bears game on Sunday live. You also have the show coming up on Thursdays as well. I also have some other news quickly. You mentioned that's a different show. Godfrey and I, SEC Football Live every Wednesday at 3 o'clock right here on the 440 Sports YouTube page as well. And coming up in about 55 minutes at the top of the hour at 4 o'clock on Tuesdays and Fridays, you are going to get Stoney Keeley and JT Runke on the Hot Read podcast every Tuesday and Friday. It's going to be a lot of fun. I know Stoney's super fired up about it. I know you guys on the internet are fired up about it. It's going to be a lot of fun. They do a great job talking ball. And obviously all of this brought to you by our wonderful and amazing friends at Sinkers Beverages. Uber Eats, if you are watching the game on Sunday at a watch party, Uber Eats, search Sinkers Beverages, have the booze delivered directly to your house and or watch party. Do not get into your vehicle, Paul. Make sure you search Uber Eats. So especially considering the news, the tragic news in the NHL over the weekend with a couple of players and what took place there. Obviously, they have a great beer selection. They have a great wine selection. They've got a great bourbon selection. They have an incredible tequila selection. But join the In Crowd, which is their rewards party, their rewards group, and they will send you like news and information about allocations, about new drops, about interesting new deals. They've got tastings almost every single Friday in there, something news in there all the time. So go check it out and make sure you give them a follow on the socials. 3-time liquor store of the year in Nashville. And, of course, Bluegrass Beverages up in Hendersonville, serving that community for over 50 years. So this is a locally owned business that you should support. All right. You mentioned the numbers there, Paul. You mentioned the 23 and the 24. And obviously you have a story up sort of about the end of the J-Rob era. You talked about it on your show last Thursday as well with Ran Carthon taking over. I'm just curious, like, do you think that this has been like a fairly systematic approach by Carthon to go about replacing pieces that he clearly views as not good enough It feels very holistic. It feels very sort of logical. They see it also feels very opportunistic. They see a guy like Jones who's got a little bit injury this and a little bit of contract that, and they go out and get him for basically nothing. They signed a bunch of safeties late in the process. There's a lot of starters on this team that were not necessarily penciled in after free agency. So your thoughts on the system and the approach by Ran Carthon?
Well, 16 of the 24 starters, if you grant base and nickel in defense and 3 wide and 2 tight in offense, are new. So higher ranking new players, willingness to play rookies, but also, I mean, they went out and got themselves starters in free agency. It all looks good. Some of these guys are older, or they're counting on older guys. Some of these guys didn't have great pedigrees walking in and have turned that around. Kenneth Murray, we were not fired up about largely when he got here based on what he had done in LA. He's looked very good in what he's done. He got elected a captain by his peers. It looks like they're going to play him a lot differently than he was played by the Chargers. And, it could be a complete career renaissance for him. And that's certainly what they're hoping for, and certainly what they saw in bringing him in. Other guys, Ernest Jones, from what I hear from people I know who've seen him up close, think he's got a knee issue that could crop up here. L'Jarius Sneed didn't really practice throughout camp because of a knee issue that they're very conscious of managing. Tyjae Spears still has no ACL. Tony Pollard and Awuzie are still coming off serious injuries a year removed, which is the right time to have them. Do we make too much of the injuries? It's hard to go out and get a free agent class of 11 and find guys who all have squeaky clean medical resumes. So things look very good. There's a lot of gelling that has to go on. Something's going to go wrong somewhere. They're going to suffer a big injury or 2 or more. Their injury luck's due to come around. And, is it a season-ending injury or is it a 3-week injury? Their depth is not great, particularly at a lot of places. But there are a lot of reasons to feel very good about them, certainly being better than a 6-win team that they were last year. And it's pretty interesting if you look back at how bad they were last year that they got 6 wins out of what they had.
Well, so it's funny because we'll get to I've got my own perception of where I thought this team was going to be all summer. And certainly one middle linebacker doesn't change all of that, especially with the situation he's in. But I am starting to come around on how feisty the team could be. They could be kind of a dangerous team that causes people some trouble. I think people need to be patient, and we'll get to sort of our official predictions a little bit later on in the AFC South and in the AFC. But from a talent perspective, there's no question they're more talented. The issue, I'm curious, like if you were to say last year, the whole thing on the show was like, they don't have enough dudes. We kind of already alluded to it. You got to have dogs, man. And the question is, how many do they have now? If they had Derrick Henry and Simmons last year, maybe Hopkins counts as well. I don't know who else you'd put on that list. And you can come up with whatever term you want to use to describe that top
stars.
tier.
You got to have stars. All right. So who are their stars?
Who are they now?
You can't call the quarterback a star by any means yet, right? Are Pollard / Spears as one a star? You can't divide up stars. It's got to be a singular guy. So they need Calvin Ridley to be a star. Is he a star yet? He had a big season in Atlanta. He had a good season in Jacksonville last year, but what was it? A little over 1,000 yards or a little over 1,100 yards. That's not a star number with what wide receivers are doing now. If you average that out over 17 games. So he's not a star yet. He could be a star in this system based on what they're going to ask him to do and based on what Levis's strengths are and based on his quickness and ability to cut and ability to run. But he's not a star yet. So who's a star on offense? I mean, J.C. Latham can be a star left tackle. He hasn't played yet, so we can't give him that. Lloyd Cushenberry, could be a star center, not very glamorous, right? So have we found one yet on offense? Is there one?
Well, it's funny. I agree with your point about star. I think and this might be semantics here, but I do think that there's a difference between like be a dude, a blue chip player, and a star. Because like Lloyd Cushenberry, you might consider him like a blue chip player.
Center.
Yeah, like you might consider him one of the best centers in the AFC, let's say, and that would make him a dude. For the sake of this conversation,
He's a dude.
But
I'll give him a dude, but I'm not going to call him a star.
But you can't be a star. It's hard to be unless you're just Jason Kelsey and you have your own and your brother's dating Taylor Swift. Like you can't be a star at center.
And you need a star. Stars, you're talking about guys who get their hands on the ball. I mean, he gets his hand on a ball to snap it, but he's not.
No, I know what you mean. Z Dean says that there are 2 stars, both on defense, Simmons and Snead. We'll get to the defense in a second. I think if I'm circling names, I mean, certainly Titans fans are banking on Will Levis becoming the face of the franchise. And if he continues to do hilarious commercials and win games, he will be the face of the franchise.
Yeah, and that's the story of the season, monitoring Will Levis.
No question.
Number one story.
I think it's Hopkins and Ridley have to be the stars of the offense. And then I think you need the center to left tackle, Kush, Skoronski, and JC. They all have pedigree. They all have elite talent, and they all could be dudes. I think that's still 3 or 4 more guys than they had last year because Henry's the guy. That was it last year. And Skoronski wasn't ready yet because of the appendectomy. So I think Hopkins, I guess, has to count no matter what. So maybe it's 2 guys. But I think they could be upwards of 5 this year. And that's a huge increase in talent. If you go on the other side, it's
still to be determined. Nobody that you announce it for yet. Hopkins, we haven't seen for a good while now. You know what he is, but he also age affects him less than most wide receivers because of his skill set. But he's a guy that can hit a wall at any time.
Good question from Ed here. Says more important to the long-term roster building, MPF or Burks being good players. I know my answer.
If you're talking long-term roster building,
I still think it's the right
long-term
tackle.
roster building. I think it's probably the right tackle. I mean, I don't think you're counting on either of them long-term. I think you have to have a young receiver in the mix next year. Because Hopkins is getting up there and he's not under contract.
Yep.
Ridley is not young. NWI is not young nor dynamic. He's good slotted where he is. Boyd is not young and not under contract beyond this year. They're solid right now, but they don't have long-term people there. And the offensive line, I think, you would love for if MPF emerges as a solid starting right tackle, there's something you could cross off your list as pass rusher and wide receiver are priorities for you next year. That'd be terrific. So if he's an answer this year, that's great because you've got him for another year under contract and potentially you could resign.
Who helps you win more football games in 2024? I think it's if MPF is very good. That helps Levis. That helps the running game. That helps the receivers.
Yeah, Burks
is 2024.
Burks is only a big deal if and when somebody in front of him goes down, which probably happens, but hopefully it's 3 weeks or a month, not a season ender. His role could change.
I put Tavondre Sweat in the same category as J.C. Latham. I circled him as a guy who could be a dude, but has yet to prove it. He's got pedigree, elite talent, tons of upside. Both of them, I think, have done everything you want to see out of 2 rookies in camp to this point to solidify themselves as starting contributors for the team. Never really flinched off their starting spots the entire time. And so I think those 2 guys are basically similar. Otherwise, it's Simmons and Snead. And that's it. Jones, if fully healthy, could be an incredible addition to the defense last minute. But I just think you just don't know what he's going to be and how long he's going to be around.
And look, they're doing some things by committee here. A lot of the pass rush numbers outside of you'd look for Simmons to do his 7 to 10. Ideally, if he has a good to great Simmons season, I'd hope Landry's a double-digit guy. And I think Mike Herndon has swayed me some. Mike Herndon's a big Landry fan and a big believer that Landry's underrated, which I'll buy. I'm a buyer of that storyline. But I think not having somebody on the opposite side hurts him. And therefore, I think that keeps him from getting there. And so I'd agree. I think McCreary can be a very fine nickel, but he's not going to be an elite player. Stonehouse is a star punter.
Okay.
He's a team, a game-changing punter. But again, that's good that it took us that long for Stonehouse's name to come up. Last year would have come up much sooner.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think you could argue it's double the talent and maybe twice as talented on the top end of the roster. And that is the job of the front office. That's the job that's Ran Carthon's job. And so far, I think he's done that. We'll see if it all works, and we'll get to sort of our conversation. But that leads us into
for a while in the prime years of this generation of Titans, you had for a while 3 All-Pros on the team at the same time in Byard, Henry, and Conklin. Then I think they made an understandable decision on Conklin. We could argue that forever, but they at least had one on each side of the ball, All-Pro. Right now, you're looking at it, you're saying, are you picking any of these guys to be All-Pro this year? I mean, if Calvin Ridley's awesome, he's not All-Pro based on you can list 10 receivers right now that you would easily predict to be All-Pro ahead of a great Calvin Ridley this season. I could pick 6 defensive tackles that I think would be All-Pro ahead of Jeffrey Simmons.
Would you go Cushenberry or Skoronski have a chance if everything breaks right for them? They could end up in that conversation.
Well, what happens with them is if they have a great season, they're All-Pro next year, because that's how it works for virtually everybody, but especially for line.
Yeah, you gotta have the body of work, and then people know who you are going into a season. Yeah, I get it. Either way, look, Landry's interesting to me because I agree with you, and I guess I'm agreeing with Herndon, which I don't like doing. That he is an underrated storyline. I do think he is, because he's the only guy on the team that does what he does, and because he's had some skins on the wall, he's had a track record of some success. I think he's ideally what you hired Denard Wilson to do is to put him in better situations to find success. And of course, with Simmons and Sweat eating up blockers, hopefully you've taken the focus off of him. So maybe he does have his best season as a pro. If that's the case, it'll be interesting to listen to his comments as the season goes along, because you had the chance. You were there when he spoke. I guess it was on Monday, correct? About sort of the end and the transition. And if you want to kind of explain a little bit about this, the clip's been out there. It's on the at Paul Kuharsky NFL on Twitter. You can get to it there. But essentially, he's talking about the differences between the previous regime and the current regime. And interesting because of who was saying it.
Well, he basically said that, there's more leeway for guys to do things in different ways to get to their result than there was in the past. And that it's freeing, that it's liberating. And I thought this was kind of a cherry on top, because guys have been saying this and have been indicating it. Now, Rashad Weaver's gone, and he didn't do well, but he told me early on, and I wrote a story about this, like a less stressful environment during camp. I quoted Rashad Weaver, Dylan Radins, Chigakonkwo. Weaver said, it definitely feels looser. There's an environment that's a lot more loose, and it's more about having fun and being yourself while at work. Braden said it's a little more comfortable. Chig said it's a lot more comfortable at times. It's on players to get that vibe. So he was removing it a little bit from coaches. It's on players to get that vibe, and the guys in the building now bring that vibe better. So he was putting it a little bit on the guys who are gone and the guys who have come in terms of carrying what the coaching staff is allowing. But look, it's no secret that Vrabel was a kind of my way or the highway guy. And what's so telling about Landry saying it is that Landry was probably as big a spokesperson for Vrabel on locker cleanout day before we knew Vrabel's fate as anybody in the locker room. He said, this guy has made me who I am, basically, and I can't imagine playing for anybody else. Now, he's an off-season.
Can't imagine it, Paul. Can't imagine.
He's an off-season and a preseason into playing for somebody else, and he's basically saying, if we could extrapolate, he's basically saying, now I've got some time playing for somebody else, and I see what it can be like with somebody who gives you more freedom, and the grass is greener. I liked the guy who was my way or the highway, but now I'm with somebody who's giving me some more freedom, and boy, it's pretty great. It doesn't mean he likes Vrabel any less or any of that, or that Vrabel didn't do for him what Vrabel did for him, but he's saying, boy, this is pretty nice that I can flap my wings in a different way.
So I want to ask you like kind of a media reporter question here, because I've spent most of camp trying to figure out if that means anything for on-field production, locker room culture, belief in oneself, whatever it might be. Jake says, freedom freedom is fun. I agree, but there are so many examples of it, like the loose atmosphere and the loose locker room and the players coach, and you can use whatever phrase you want. There's a lot of examples of it not working or working for a short period of time. I'm curious as a reporter, how do you dig into outside of outcomes, because that's what's coming on Sunday and that's how we're going to decide all this stuff, because that's what the NFL is. But how do you know if it's actually leading to productivity? That's what I find interesting.
Well, Callahan said, in this story, you still need guys to be stressed. Like a stressful environment versus stressing your team to get them ready for stress, which is a lot of what the NFL season is about, are two different things. So he said very early on, I want guys to come in and be happy, to feel like this is a place they enjoy coming to work. I don't think that was the case under Vrabel for a lot of guys. I think there are a lot of guys under Vrabel that pulled into that parking lot, pulled into their parking spot, and probably sat there for 90 seconds, 2 minutes, maybe some of them 5 minutes, who thought,
who are you talking about, PK?
I don't really want to go to work today. Are you
talking about Christian Fulton?
I'm not looking forward to going into that thing. Young guys, hurt guys, guys who were underproducing, you guys who quit, not that they didn't have one in Sadiq Charles. And now those guys are getting out of their car quicker and going in. But they still, I think, faced a good deal of stress in preparation and will. But you ask a good question. And Vrabel stressed it all the time. You don't know the true character of a team until you see them under bad circumstances. And Callahan has said the same thing. He hasn't beat us over the head with it. It was a big Vrabel thing. It's a theme. Yeah. It's a smaller theme for Callahan, but he said the same thing. And I think every coach says it. You don't really reveal yourself until you're under hard times. Now, Callahan hopes they don't have to really reveal themselves for a good while and that the hard time doesn't come later. But to Jake's point, freedom is fun. It's fun if it comes with wins.
Yep.
If it doesn't come with wins, then, who's the heavy and all of that.
Well,
Vrabel was the heavy. Will Callahan be the heavy, or does he have a heavy? All of those are questions. I don't think Callahan's afraid to chew guys out or be hard. I think he's more willing to chew guys out and be hard and then come back tomorrow and move on to the next thing.
A couple of very interesting questions here. The payoff for playing for Belichick was the ring. That was the whole, like, we knew
those guys were miserable a lot.
They were miserable, and you knew it, but the payoff was worth the juice was worth the squeeze, for lack of a better phrase. And Z Dean has a great question that's going to kick us off on our next topic. But Ed asks an interesting one here as well, which is Callahan has stated that practices would be hard, so games are easier. Did we see a noticeable difference in camp from previous camps to support that? I would say no. I don't. I would say no
as well. I think anybody that's worth their salt as a coach, the practices are hard. But this idea that practices are harder than the game, they might be faster paced at some stages. If you're running a 12-rep sequence and a guy's getting 6 reps in a row, getting back to the huddle for a receiver who might be taken off after 4 reps, in a game, but has to do the 6 reps in a thing, that might be harder, but it's not harder than a game. You're not getting hit, for starters. So that's a big change. It can't be harder than a game. You can't buy that. They're trying to stress them as well as they can to make it as game-like as they can.
Yeah. This ain't the
but it's no different than Vrabel's practices. And Vrabel's practices weren't dramatically different than Mularkey's practices. And they weren't, you look for how much are guys standing around, and sometimes there's different. I think Vrabel's practices were pretty efficient. I think Callahan's practices are pretty efficient. Are they as efficient as Tony Dungy's practices, which are the most efficient practices I've watched at training camp? I think they both came up a little bit short of those.
I would. It's hard to, like, no one's the junction boys. There's no 2-a-days. There's no 4 straight days of practice. Like, none of that exists anymore. I would say Vrabel's practices were more intense because of his personality, potentially.
Had more volume.
Yeah, but that's about it. Otherwise, they kind of. I mean, you see a training camp practice. You've seen one. You kind of see a lot of them. So, but that's a good question though, because I don't think there's been a discernible difference, and so that shouldn't be a factor in how they perform during the regular season. So, all right, Z Dean's question is going to kick us off into our next topic, but I want to mention Sinkers Beverages, of course. There's road game coming up this weekend. There you go. I don't know if you're drinking on the job here, PK, which is encouraged, by the way.
Straight pints of vodka is what we do in the Kuharsky house. Russians.
Are you a vodka guy? I don't think I know this about you. What is your beverage of choice?
I have grown into being more of a vodka guy as I've gotten older. which I considered somewhat a tribute to my parents.
Okay. Straight on the rocks? Like
No.
just martini or like little tonic, little lime, cranberry? What do you do?
Yeah, tonic would be my preference, of course, because it has more calories. So whatever I could do to fatten myself up.
So is it club soda that has less calories? Is that what?
Yeah, the club soda's awful.
It tastes like shit. I agree.
Yeah.
I agree. No, my wife drinks it. I'm like, what is this shit? And she's like, I want my liquor to taste like water. And I'm like, that's a way to go if you want to do that. I've always had vodka martinis. I've always been a vodka martini guy.
It's hard to pick up a martini glass in public is my thing.
What are you talking about?
I just don't think it looks manly.
So your delicate male ego can't handle it? Is what I'm hearing?
I can handle it. I'm not a martini guy. I prefer a cocktail glass, generally speaking.
I also enjoy an old-fashioned, all bourbon and all vodka, by the way. You can pick up at Sinker's Beverages. I love if I'm going to a steakhouse or eating a nice meal, I like a vodka martini before dinner.
Jake wants to know if Sinkers has spikes in sales on Titans losses versus wins.
I will reach out to them and I could find out exactly how that works. I'm willing to bet. So look, Uber Eats, search Sinker's Beverages, send the booze directly to your house. You can get the booze delivered right there. That way you don't have to drive. And I think the old line was they drive so you can drink is the old line. So we'll train you up on that one, PK. But otherwise, I would be interested to know, because there are some studies, and we're off topic here, but that's great. That's the whole point of good advertisements on 440 Sports, which is Sinker's Beverages. There are studies about the human brain that show that your brain is more active when you are watching the team you hate lose than when you are watching the team you love win, which is a strange phenomenon in the human brain.
Well, it's a subset of generally the negative thing, I use an extreme example. We're not sitting and watching planes land, but when one crashes, it really gets our attention. But that your sample there, which is attuned to what we're here to talk about for this hour, applies really to everything. The negative is what sets off the brain more so than the positive. People don't really believe that. And this Southern genteel thinking, people think that's not really the case. It really is. If you examine things closely, that's our default.
I will be interested. I do, because I know I've studied enough audience engagement and interest in both radio and newspapers very well. There is sort of like when things are going really bad, people are more engaged in paying attention and watching and reading and clicking. But ultimately, at the end of the day, and this is just a little inside baseball for everybody watching, like our business, my business, your business will do better if they are very, very good. Like eventually people just get tired of bad and they eventually want good. And that's rocket science right there, PK.
One thing that's become fascinating, well, two things that have become fascinating to me is one, that people want to talk about Sunday's game all the way up until next Sunday's game. They're less interested in previewing. So after we're done with Chicago, we'll all be getting ready for a Jets game, right? And there'll be some talk about Aaron Rodgers and all of that. But I don't know about your traffic and the numbers and stuff. But if I do much Jets stuff that week, it will not do as well as continued talk about remnants of the Bears result will do. And also in this day and age, this is more of an aside, but I have people coming to my site and joining and people leaving, not in huge quantities, but whenever somebody leaves, I ask them, what could I have done better and why? And almost every one of them that leaves says, I just don't have time to pay as close attention to this team as I used to. And this is the NFL, which I think we would all say, of all things that people have hobbies for, if you were interested in it, the chances that you're no longer interested in it are as slim as anything there is. And yet some people feel too busy to stay even attuned to their team in the National Football League, which I think just doesn't bode well for our attention spans on anything.
No, but that's the point of your website, and when you kind of were ahead of the curve when you launched it, and the point of my company is to provide folks with sort of longer, more nutritional stuff, but not 20 hours a week. I'm not throwing 20 hours a week at you. We're going to throw a couple of hours a week at you, but hopefully it's very smart and thoughtful and informative. And so you don't have to spend 20 hours a week listening to every single segment. You can hang out and not get empty calories, get quality calories. And then you can mix it in your martini glass and drink it out of a
and something to eat and
glass.
drink every day. Some sustenance every weekday for sure.
So Dominic says this as well. I feel the same way about martinis. I order them in a cocktail glass. What is the problem with the tall martini glass? Why are you guys so threatened by the shape of that glass? I don't understand.
I don't know. Like if you're watching a movie, I guess Bond was
he looks great.
But now if you're watching a movie, I think it's more likely that the female lead is drinking a martini.
All right. I see what you're saying.
Dean said, my brain must be going crazy watching Baltimore lose. I
don't know what that means.
I don't either. And I have no rooting interest in any of these teams. No, I just don't think you should be excited about Baltimore winning.
It spills indefinitely, says Jake. No, not if you know how to drink them. It's the Dominic says it's the
we create those towers where you pour into the top and it flows into all the other ones.
Dominic comes back. It's the equivalent to a man wearing a bikini. First of all,
it's not that.
It's definitely not. But if you're capable of wearing a bikini, it's America. Go do whatever you want.
Hey, that's a good segue for something I wanted to bring up today. Okay. Now that we're doing this show together through the season, at the very least. Let's create a nice dress code. I'm glad to see you in a polo shirt, as ugly as it is today. But I think we should make an agreement today. Collared shirts and no hats. If people are coming, they're giving us some time. They should be able to look at two reasonably dressed men.
I am very attracted.
Collared shirts, no hats.
No hats? I'm a hat person. I'm a hat person.
Right. And you can wear your hat when you come onto the air. You can take it off. And as soon as you're off, you can put it back on. For 23 hours, you can wear a hat, but not for this house.
I'm going to give you, I'll compromise. Like
everyone votes yes.
Like any good compromise. I'll give you 1 out of 2.
Well, you already had the collared shirt on, so I didn't need to.
I'll give you 1 out of 2.
Regulate that.
Well, I didn't have time to, I got to handsomely coif everything. You don't know what that's like.
You've got plenty of time to coif. Plenty of time. So we have a deal in place. No hats,
we do not.
No t-shirt.
I did not agree to terms on this. I don't know how to say your name, K. Dilly, but just use a straw and never lift the glass. No, that's not how you drink martinis.
You can't drink a martini.
You guys are ridiculous. You guys are absurd on this. All right, so I'm gonna I want to start our expectations, playoff picks, AFC South, AFC Titans record, etc. Conversation with the question earlier from Z Dean, which said, which side of the ball do you think will finish higher at the end of the season's rankings? I have a pretty clear answer to this. So I'd like to hear what you have to say.
Well, it always ends up a defensive football team. Almost always. Oh, God, backwards hat is even worse. No backwards hats, we should definitely say. It always ends up a defensive football team. I mean, there were like 1 or 2 exceptions in the history of the team. I hope that's not the case. With Brian Callahan bringing what Brian Callahan's bringing, I hope it's not the case for them, and that Will Levis turns into what people want Will Levis to turn into. I'd like to see quarterback stability. I'd like to see him successful because he's such an engaging personality. I'd like the weapons to be the weapons that we expect. The defense, I have concerns about Snead with the knee. I worry about Adams in the role, though that role is really a gravy role, a big dime, occasional big nickel. But my gut says it's going to be a defensive football team.
If you're asking me which unit has a better chance to finish above average, top half of the league, I am taking the offense. And my reasoning behind that is not only is the sport geared towards that. I think Callahan has shown us in flashes, at least so far, with the track record at Cincinnati and in the camp, that the scheme could be very sound. Is Will Levis always going to execute that? Are rookie offensive linemen going to always execute that? Are injured and elderly receivers going to always execute that? I don't know. But I think the questions on defense, I think, are larger and more like the breadth of the questions, like pass rusher, unsure. Secondary, I think, could be very good, but lots of questions. Middle linebacker, still a question. Simmons is great, but Sweat is unproven. I think if you ask this team to run the football a lot with rookies, I think they can do it with Pollard and Spears. I think Levis can hit on some big plays when he needs to and manage the game elsewise. I think the offense is going to be better. I think the defense, the depth is a major concern. Like they literally don't have a 5th defensive lineman listed on the team. Like it's that Ali Gay and Daryl Baker and Julius Wood, the guys they just signed to the back end of the roster, like they're one toe injury away from being in the starting lineup. And that is concerning for me from a depth perspective. So I would say the same. I would lean offense.
Could say the same about the offensive line, where if you're getting to Brunskill, I don't think he fits what they want to do. Ojukwu, fell like a stone once Petit Frere was back. Jalen Duncan, I think, is super raw. Rupsich, get you through a game, but if he's starting, you're in trouble. I think the offensive line is an injury away from real trouble. That's where Bill Callahan would earn some of his money, obviously. But I don't love the depth there. Both the lines, the depth is a big problem.
I don't disagree with you there, but if you told me Hopkins is going to miss some time and you got to try to go win with NWI or Burks, I think you can do it. If you lose Pollard, you still have Spears or vice versa. If you lose Chig, you have Wiley and like 5 other tight ends on the roster. I just and to me, again, I know Wilson and Callahan are both in the same spot where we have not called plays and we have to prove ourselves, but the track record is great. I just think it's easier to do that on offense than it is on defense. Like defense is more dude driven, if that makes sense. Whereas the coach has more impact, I think, on the offense. Maybe I'm wrong on that, but
I'm very motivated by a history of covering this team since the very beginning to believe the offense is going to be the better unit when I see the offense being the better unit.
Yep. Crazy enough, I think you might be able to argue last year the offense was slightly better than the defense, which is bad. Which is bad for all sides. All right.
That's the better of 2 really bad units.
Yes. All right. So I want to start very quickly and then get into more of an AFC conversation. Go to Sinkers, by the way. PaulKuharsky.com, Paul Kuharsky podcast. I've thought all along this is a 7-win team all summer. Improved. You're going to see growth. Will Levis, I'm going to use the coach's words here. He needs to improve accuracy and processing. That's the things he needs to develop into. I don't think leadership is a problem, work ethic. I don't think any of that's the problem. I think they were a 7-10 team in my brain. I think they, like all teams in the NFL, a couple of bounces, couple of penalties, couple of injuries, and you could go 5 wins, you could go 9 wins. I think that's the range. I think they have an average offense. I think they're going to have an average to slightly below average defense. I think they are an average football team that gives this fan base signs of progress and optimism for the future, but that they're not yet ready to compete with what amounts to Pittsburgh, Cleveland, the Jets, Miami, Cincinnati for a wild card spot. I think Houston is a Super Bowl championship contender. I think they're like a 2 or a 3 seed. So I don't think they challenge for the division. That's sort of where I'm at. I don't need you to give me a number total, but I think that's 7 or 8 wins, I think, is where I would put expectations for this team in 2024.
I might be a win or 2 better than that, but here's my problem. And hold on, Titans transactions just came out, so let's see what it is. Waived from the active roster, Luke Gifford.
Okay,
that is a money-saving move. They saved $1.9 million there. Maybe they sign him back next week, but I am not a Luke Gifford guy, so. All right. There's that.
So
here's my thing.
Murray, Gibbons, Reese, Williams, and Gray on IR. So there you go.
So might make room for somebody. The problem with me for the Titans in the AFC is I see 10 teams that are conceivably better than they are. I think the AFC East is loaded. I think Buffalo is not as good as they've been, but I still think they're playoff caliber and they're better. I think the Jets are going to be defensively excellent and that Rodgers is going to do some things and they're better. I think Miami is too finesse, too reliant on speed, probably get hurt, but they're better. Cincinnati's better. Baltimore's better. Houston's better. Kansas City's better. That's my playoff field. I think Cleveland may be better. I think Jacksonville's probably better. And I think the Chargers could have a MIke Vrabel kind of better year where they don't really have as much talent, but they've got a good quarterback and they're rejuvenated after several years of a lot of talent with a bad coach into a year where they're starting a rebuild with a good coach and they might overachieve. and be like a very sound football team that wins some close games and is as good or better than Tennessee.
Do the other side. How many teams are the Tennessee Titans definitively better than?
Well, that would leave New England. That would leave
Vegas.
Pittsburgh. I'm not high on Pittsburgh at all.
You think hang on, just for the
I
record,
don't like Pittsburgh.
You think the Tennessee Titans are definitively better than the Pittsburgh?
Not definitively better, but probably better. I think they're better than the Colts. I don't like the Colts. I think the Colts hype is out of control. The Colts spent a lot of money to sign their own guys. Their own guys aren't great. Richardson, I wasn't a buyer coming out. 4 games wasn't enough, so he's like a rookie. I think he's going to stumble a lot. I don't even like him in fantasy. They're better than Denver, who I think Denver is going to continually expose that Sean Payton was in a terrific situation with Drew Brees and not an offensive mastermind that redesigned football.
I like Bo Nix. I think Bo Nix plays into the modern NFL quarterback.
I think Bo Nix is a product of having been in college forever. And who am I missing in the West? Kansas City I like. Chargers I just talked about. Denver I don't like. Raiders. I don't think the Raiders would be very good.
So we can kind of work through the AFC and the division kind of at the same time, because I think Kansas City is if you don't pick Kansas City to be the 1 seed in the AFC, you're kind of just being cute and you're just doing it on purpose.
You're doing it out of Kansas City fatigue and out of
you're going to be better
to win 3 in a row.
Their regular season last year wasn't the best season Mahomes and Reed have had. If people forget about that, I think they're better team this year, better on offense.
I won't be surprised if they do that again, where they're not terrific in the regular season and just are good in the playoffs.
I mean, the brain drain on the Baltimore Ravens defense in particular, with like basically 3 coordinators leaving that defense and the offensive line changeover. Everyone knows they're very, very good. I'm picking them to win the division, but I would have Houston as the 2 seed. I think Houston has, like, if you talk about what does the NFL value right now, it's the guy who throws the football. They're great there. It's the guy who catches the football. They're loaded at that position. It's the guy who blocks for the guy who throws the football. They're great there with Tunsil and company. And they're great at the pass rush, which is the guy who attacks the quarterback who throws the football. At all the key spots, Houston is very good, and they're a great coaching staff.
The only reason I'm scared of Houston is because there's room for second-year regression from a lot of those people. That's the only reason.
And watching tape is absolutely going to affect you. You have to be able to anticipate the fact that defensive coaches are going to adjust to C.J. Stroud's processing speed, and he's got to be able to prepare for that. So I like
DeMeco Ryans a lot. Think he's excellent and on top of all of these things.
I think the range for the Titans in the division is 2, 3, and 4. I don't think there's a chance that they finish first, but I think there's a chance they could be second. I think there's a chance they're fourth. So
I think it's 2 and 3. I'm really down on the Colts.
So what's fascinating about the Colts, and not to get off on a Colts convo for a second, but I'm fascinated by, like, while the Titans are trying to modernize and go a different direction schematically, the Colts are actually, I think, going to end up going the other direction, which is Jonathan Taylor, offensive line, quarterback, run game. Sirianni's very good at being sort of creative in the run game. They're going to stretch the field with those weapons that, Downs and Pierce, that aren't particularly great, but they do force you to play deep. And then they're going to be super interesting with the run game. I think the run game could be very interesting for the Colts. I don't know what that means in terms of wins and losses.
Is their line going to get back to a place where it hasn't been for?
They were good last year. They bounced back last year after 2 years ago being very bad. But I would agree. I would have the Colts 4 in the division and the Texans 1. I have a very difficult time deciding between Jacksonville and the Titans. I would lean Jacksonville 2. I think Trevor Lawrence is underrated. My former co-host is not here to defend himself. I think Trevor Lawrence is, when actually put into a situation where the plays are smart and the supporting cast is good, I think he makes a lot of plays. And I think Lawrence is going to bounce back and have a pretty good season. So
they fell apart and they got hurt. Do they grow? I think I believe in the coach. Eric Armstead, to me, is a big addition. You've got Allen and Travon Walker. Travon Walker shouldn't have been the number 1 pick, but he could be a good player. Devin Lloyd's a really good player. Gabe Davis and Brian Thomas are good enough with Kirk and Ingram and Etienne for Lawrence. I suspect that they grow. They were 8-3 and they fell apart. There were several teams like that last year. Philadelphia was very good and fell apart. And I think those teams have good enough things in place. Peterson in place, Roseman in place, that kind of serve to gel those teams. And if they're healthy enough, to build off what was good for the first 2/3 or 3/4 of those seasons to get them better.
To me, it's about, I agree with everything you said. I think they've invested in the offensive line in the offseason to protect their star quarterback. And then the scheme, if they make some tweaks and things like more play action under center, for example, which they've said they're going to do, if they're going to do that kind of stuff and maximize Trevor Etienne in the running game or Travis Etienne, Trevor plays at Georgia, and then allow Lawrence to sort of threaten down the field and create some more explosive plays, I think he can deliver on that. I think the pure talent is there. I think the system has not been helpful to him. And I agree with you that they're a couple injuries away from being like a 10-win team last year.
I think Stoney's here saying Trevor Lawrence overrated forever. I don't disagree that I don't know that he's been overrated because people have dropped off on him so far because he hasn't lived up to the hype. But once in a while, there's a guy that just takes longer than everybody thought he should. And for some reason, I think he might be that guy.
And if we always use the Jets as a punchline for quarterback development, right? Like, oh, you got drafted by the Jets, you're screwed. You got to include Jacksonville into that conversation. Like, they can't develop a quarterback to save their lives. So this is having the Urban Meyer thing be his first year was a huge. He
got more out of Byron Leftwich than anybody had any business getting out of him.
That's true.
That's a previous era.
I guess Blake Bortles went to the AFC Championship game, so there's that.
But see, that's a guy that like overachieved, and then they think, oh, that's the guy, and it should have just said, well, he overachieved that one year.
Blake Bortles, as they say in the college world. All right, so Houston 1, Jacksonville 2, Titans 3, Indy 4. It sounds like we kind of agree on that. I think that I agree with your Chargers analysis that Jim Harbaugh and Jesse Minter, I think, make them like finally having an identity on that team in making the offensive line better. They don't have the weapons around Herbert, but kind of building inside out. I think.
And I pick them to go. I've picked them to go to the playoffs every year, and I'm not picking them to go this year, even though I think they'll finally get on track.
I don't have them either, but I would say Chargers, Browns, and I would include the Steelers in this, and the Jaguars could all be better than the Titans. And if that's to your point, I'm not picking any of those teams to make the playoffs. So if you're 3 or 4 deep into the non-playoff group of teams, I just think you're asking a lot of a first-year coach, first-year coordinator, first-year starting quarterback. Like, all this stuff has to go right. Injuries have to stay out of the picture. I just think you're asking a lot. And somebody, I think it was Ed earlier that said, is it too simple to just say that it's all about Levis? I could call a 7-10 season a huge step forward for this franchise if Will Levis shows that he's clearly the guy. I've long been concerned, Paul, that they're going to get to the end of the year. They're going to be a 7 or 8 or 9 win team, and there's still going to be a couple of lingering questions about Levis, and that's kind of a scary place to be as well. Is it as simple as just saying, look, as long as the quarterback proves he belongs and they show some competence on both sides of the ball, that's what you're looking for as a fan this year?
I don't know. There's a lot of context to that. I mean, if you're 3/4 of the way through the season and he's proved that, then you're going to want a big last month where they go and do something with it. If you're 3/4 of the way through the season and he's still kind of teetering there, then the last month can be about that. So to me, it depends a lot on the timing. I think he's going to be inconsistent throughout his career. I think this year is about getting kind of control, managing the inconsistencies to some degree. And I think the things are going to be the same for him throughout: decision-making, inaccuracy. Is his completion percentage going to go up? Yeah, because they're going to throw a lot more short stuff. Yep. Is his completion percentage going to be an issue on deep mid-range stuff where he's had troubles in practice? That could be an issue throughout his career, and something that you're going to live with, even if he proves that he can be your quarterback for 2 contracts or 3.
Great question from Jake. We'll get to in just a second. So I've got the Chiefs winning the West, the Texans winning the South. I've got Baltimore winning the North, and I'm going to pick Buffalo's got major questions on defense, but I'm not going to bet against Josh Allen to win the division. That feels like it could be like a 10-7, 10-7, 9-8 New England kind of division, like where every team is pretty good, minus New England. I got Buffalo winning. I'll go Cincinnati, the Jets, and the Dolphins all making the playoffs.
That's so I've got Buffalo winning the East, Cincinnati winning the North, Houston winning the South, Kansas City winning the West.
So you're down on Baltimore a little bit.
I've got Baltimore as a wild card. And then I'm doing this load up on one division thing. I've got the Jets and Miami coming out of the East.
We agree.
Is that the same field?
I've got the exact same field. I just have Baltimore. I have Baltimore
Cincinnati
winning the division. But I think it's fair to ask questions about, they lost a couple offensive linemen. And again, McDonald, Wilson, and I'm now the third name I'm drawing a blank on, all left the defensive coaching staff.
Yeah.
And like they've got some weapons, but they don't have an elite weapon. Derrick Henry's a nice piece for that team. Honestly, if you're betting on them, you're betting on stability and John Harbaugh and sort of identity and Lamar Jackson. Guam Pop says I vote to keep the hat. Thank you, Guam.
I think again, you don't have a vote, Guam. I think again, AFC really superior to the NFC. I had trouble finding 2 out of 3 wild cards in the NFC. I did the same thing. I put 3 teams in one division in the playoffs. I've got Green Bay winning the North. I got Chicago. I'm buying into it, but also I think you have to put somebody in. And so I've got Chicago actually ahead of Detroit for a wild card because I think Detroit's going to have some hangover issues. But I've got Green Bay, Chicago, Detroit all in the playoffs out of the North, with Dallas as the other wild card because there's nobody else.
No Atlanta.
And I think
Atlanta.
I've got Atlanta winning the division, but I think that division continues to suck.
Yeah. I think Detroit is awesome this year. And honestly, I think Houston is this year's their last year's Detroit, right? Detroit sort of really good down the stretch. They were hot. They gained experience, and then they started out the season and sort of, they beat the Chiefs and kind of were the best team in the division the whole year. I think that's what Houston does this year in the AFC. I could be on board with most of everything you said there. I think Green Bay, Detroit, Dallas, San Francisco, Philadelphia, Atlanta. I think the Rams could get in as well. I'd keep an eye on the Rams. A lot of people
high in the Rams. I'm out. They play the AFC East, which I have 3 teams going to the playoffs out. And I think they play the NFC North, which I have 3 teams going to the playoffs out. So I'm not giving a second team to the NFC West. And I've got, obviously, 49ers winning there. One team I'm going to tell you is going to suck. New Orleans. New Orleans is going to pick in the top 5.
You're out on the whole thing. There's a lot of people that agree with you on that. I don't necessarily disagree with you. All right, so let's see here. Here's a question from Z Dean, and we're going to get to your question, Jake, in just a second. But would you rather Levis have an okay season, the Titans pay him, to save money in the future? I assume that's sort of like the early paycheck discount to some degree, or wait another year to be positive, but costing more in the long run if he delivers on that is my assumption there. Anything that proves to you that Will Levis is your starting quarterback and deserves another contract is a positive step. I
don't pay him on an okay season. But we're talking, this is only 2 seasons. You can't pay him after 2 seasons. You have to wait
1.5
seasons.
1.5 seasons.
Yeah, really. But contractually, you can't pay him until after he's been in the league.
You mean like physically you're not able to. I see what you're saying. Yeah. You got to wait till the next year. All right, Jake says, what keeps you up at night thinking about this team? And my answer is the front 7 on defense. That's my answer. The offense, I've never been this optimistic about a collection of players. I don't necessarily think it's going to lead to elite success and an elite offense, but I think that there's a lot of growth and patience with a lot of these pieces. They're going to the most important thing that could happen for this team, Paul, is all these young, high draft picks blend together and grow together in an offense. The Packers showed it to us last year. Levis, Spears, Wiley, Skoronski, JC, they are all young, talented pieces that if they all grow together could be very interesting in a couple of years. The front 7 is where they're going to lose football games, in my opinion. If anything happens to Sweater Simmons, you don't have a great pass rush. You don't have great depth along the defensive line. Maybe you have a star linebacker now, but we're not sure. The front 7, if you cannot pressure the quarterback and you can't stop the run, that is a concern for me.
Jake, nothing keeps me up at night about the Tennessee Titans. Once in a while, I'll toss and turn over. Like, I don't have a story idea that I'm happy with for tomorrow, or most of the time it'll be the day after tomorrow.
It's a
my work keeps me up at night. I know it's a figure of speech, but like nothing about the team upsets me in a way that disjoints my life. I cover them for a living.
What do you think keeps Brian Callahan up at night?
Pass pressure. Though your answer is a good one. I think nothing on the other side of the ball is going to overwhelm anything on his side of the ball.
Yep.
And so anything that would hurt Will Levis.
There you go. All right. What do you got coming up on the site this week for everybody? And where can they catch you and listen to you each and every week this season?
Yeah, well, I've got a story coming up about the size of Brian Callahan's play sheet, which is on a letter-sized piece of paper, not a legal or longer-sized piece of paper, which I find interesting. So he's keeping things manageable for himself as a play caller and for his team in terms of what they need to consume.
Didn't he say like a lot of the stuff on the back is not even relevant?
Yeah, it's super situational. Yeah. You know, odds of getting to it are slim. So got that coming up. I'll be on Robbie and Rex Road tomorrow morning on 102.5 The Game from 7:30 to 9. Paul Kuharsky podcast on Thursday, tentatively scheduled right now for 3 o'clock. Might move to 4 o'clock. Might move to 1 o'clock. Titans schedule is jamming us up a little bit. And then Blake Bedingfield's preview to come on Friday with the one good look. We talked about previews. The one look you need to see at the Bears before the Titans head to Chicago. And then the highlight of the trip to Chicago is actually Cubs-Yankees on Saturday afternoon, though it's going to be 63 degrees, which makes my clothing choice a little uncertain.
No, dude. Chicago this time of year is incredible. It's an incredible city. For those who are traveling.
I'm familiar with Chicago.
Food, it's great. It's great.
63 degrees is a little
63 sounds amazing. It's been 102 in this town, damn it. Go get some good food. Get yourself a good steak. Whatever. Get some good stuff up there.
Oh, don't worry. I'll eat well. I will eat well.
And drink well in Nashville. Drink well in Nashville. Sinkers Beverages, of course. That's where you go get those beverages. And, of course, Bluegrass up in Hendersonville. And for those who have stayed all the way to the end, stay tuned on Thursday morning. We might have another episode of a football show scheduled and planned for you guys. You're going to recognize the other name as well. So we're very excited about that.
Shocking. I don't even know about that.
We're going to do some stuff in the morning. You might have some ideas, but we'll see.
Interesting.
I got too much stuff to say, PK. It's just how it goes. So I can't go 7 days without talking about the Titans.
Guess where I'm doing fantasy draft number 2 of 4, which is way too many tonight. Guess where I'm going?
Where are you going?
Nissan Stadium.
For a fantasy draft?
Yeah. My group wanted to do it in a club section at Nissan Stadium, and they let you come for a certain price. So I'm going to the office.
I'd like to know where you draft Tajay Spears. He's a fascinating one to try to pinpoint and when to draft him. So.
Behind Tony Pollard.
I agree. No, I got him very late last night in my keeper draft. I got him like in the 12th round or something like that. So it was he's my backup, but I thought pretty good value. Young player, offense is going to grow this year. We'll see what happens.
I did a 14-team one the other night, and my son did a 6-team one.
6?
So his team is, it's just his 5 best friends in him. So I was like, dude, your team is, it's like
the waiver
all-star team.
Yeah, that's ridiculous. If you're going to be that, like I have a 10-team league, but like we have 2 quarterbacks. So if you're going to play in a smaller league, you got to add difficulty, right? Like we got IDPs and quarterbacks and stuff. But it's going to be a lot of fun. Season's here. 440 Sports, paulkarski.com. We got a lot of stuff planned for you guys, so stay tuned. Rate, review, subscribe. Give us a thumbs up on the YouTube page, Facebook, and Twitter as well. Make sure you subscribe to our page as well as Paul's. We got the Hot Read podcast coming up right now on the website. Of course, you got JT and Stoney on that website. And thank you to Sinkers.
Collared shirts and no hats. Our new rule. Boom. See ya.
Good thing you're not in charge of any of this. Thank you, PK. Have a great weekend. Safe travels.
We'll
talk to you next week.